Hey, so in this video, what I'm going to break down for you is how we can look to the authoritarian playbook that administrations like the Trump administration are clearly operating from. The psychology as well really sort of linked to that. What that means for us in our day-to-day lives. So it's looking at that structure, that story, that psychology, applying the principles from history and looking at, well, what is it that we can do? How do we find power at a time like this? And it history is there to really lay all of that out for us. So I'm going to start out by giving you an outline of a story of a specific individual from history who is relevant to this. I'm going to show how that applies to the kind of modern manifestations of authoritarianism and what that means for us. So let's dive in. So, firstly, I want to tell you the story of a man called Hans Litten. So, Hans Litten was a German Jewish defense lawyer who, in 1931, famously put Adolf Hitler on the stand in a courtroom. This was because the Nazi Party, and I think Hitler was specifically linked to this incident, where the Nazi Party carried out an attack on a meeting held by opponents. So it was like a left wing meeting, and Hitler and his thugs broke in and beat everybody up. So Hans Litten was defending those individuals and bringing Hitler to account. And what he was unpacking with this process was saying that because at the time Hitler was trying to project an image of being legitimate. So if it became clear to the wider public that actually what he was engaging in was violence and coercion, that would have undermined his political credibility. So Hans Litten, in his cross examination, was laying out for everybody to see that this was not somebody who was a legitimate political um, presence, that he was resorting to violence, and that was the way that he was trying to gain influence. So it was important because it was making the point that this is actually not what people think it is. At that time, in 1931, Hitler did have a level of power. He wasn't yet chancellor, but he had enough influence to really kind of intimidate somebody like Hans Litten. So anyway, Hans just dismantled Hitler on the stand, and Hitler was so angry and filled with hatred for Hans Litten. He felt humiliated, he felt exposed, he felt like he was undermined. It was all of the things. It's like prick a fragile ego, and this is what happens. And as I'm talking through this story, you're going to see all sorts of parallels around the kinds of behaviour that we're seeing today. So Hitler was mad, he was angry. Fast forward to 1933, Hitler becomes Chancellor. The night of the Reichstag fire, he has Hans Litten arrested, and he puts Litten in jail. Essentially, he sends him to a labour camp where he lives out the rest of his life, having a pretty horrible time. He is forced into hard labour, he is tortured, he ends up walking with crutches by the end. And it said, I mean, the official line is that he took his own life, but he died in prison. There's no real way of knowing. This can be taken as a cautionary tale. This is Hitler saying, this is what happens to people who defy me. This is what happens to people who want to speak up and think that they can make a difference. But you are wrong. You should be afraid, because this is what I do to people who try to hold me to account. Now, he remained angry about Hans Litten for the rest of his life. And you can argue whilst the circumstances of Hitler were clear at the end, that he took his own life in a bunker in Berlin, while the wolves were at the door, he was cornered. But I have a theory that his cowardice, his fragile ego, were all at play when he was most fearful about the prospect of being held accountable. That idea was so abhorrent to him that he just couldn't face it. So the impact of Hans Litten was that it demonstrates how much Hitler would do anything to avoid accountability, and how he would try to maintain control in any way that he could while he had any sort of influence. Now, my kind of lens on this is also relevant to concepts of power and control. So, power is really something bigger than ourselves. We think of the word power and we might kind of think of male authority, male networks. It feels like it's something about maleness. Power is meant to be a male kind of domain. But actually, what we see from history is that real power is about collective action, which is led by values. So some of the most kind of effective examples of that are where you see communities or groups who are persecuted, but they find power in their connections, their storytelling, their ability to create a movement, a wave which is bigger than them. You take, for example, the call and response traditions from African heritage, which are clear throughout African American heritage through hip hop, gospel, jazz. It's something which is more powerful than the individual, and it moves through, just like the traditions of indigenous populations the world over who have faced oppression, genocide, the prospect of being wiped out. But where they find power is through the ongoing legacy, storytelling, the collective values that people have, which are bigger than any one person. So that is power, that is true power. What authoritarianism is about is control. It's small minds engaged in small acts to try to maintain control. Now, Hannah Arendt